Developed, created, and owned by James PoeArtistry Productions. That's the way of the world. This will be the topic that we talk about today in the Perceptive Readers podcast. I have to tell you first that I almost wanted to call it the James PoeArtistry podcast. But again, what we do here, I would still like to keep it as Perceptive Readers because it even describes it more into detail. You see, because as you know, when I talk about James PoeArtistry, it does get into the poetic and artistry of life. However, you see, Perceptive Readers, it lets the person know right away, oh, we're going to actually go a little bit more deeper into subjects, does it not? And so the topic for today really is, that's the way of the world. And I want you to think about something. Think about my statements very carefully, which I know you do. You see, sometimes a person, and this happens often really, can be applying some principle so well that other individuals will get the misunderstanding of what is being accomplished because the principle is really being applied so well. And you see, in their fix-it mode, may actually implement certain, suggestions very strongly that end up causing the rift. And the rift may look like it was because all of a sudden that a person wasn't applying a principle that was working, but it actually did come from interference from overdue nosiness, as the Bible would even call that word of busybody. Okay. Now this is what I want to share with you. You see, there's been times where an individual, like I said, will come to an understanding of the world, people, situations, from the lighthearted to the very serious. And once they see the field, so to speak, see the field, so to speak. And when I say field, I'm not just talking about the physical, but also the spiritual. You see what I'm saying? Then they realize certain things. And in that realization, they also come to the conclusion, okay, this is what it is all over. So where do I still find my nourishment, my support, and where I can be helpful? You see what I'm saying? And in that, they're factoring in, yes, the will of God as well. See, that will of God, as he moves persons along, sometimes they'll say, boy, I feel like he took me from here to get to there. But all the while, yes, there was a learning process going on. But all the while, it doesn't mean that the person still wasn't knowledgeable enough to make their, decision in these different areas and that different areas. See, because they realized, okay, this was a phase that I went through to be strengthened physically. Oh, and so I went in here. This was a phase I went to strengthen my mind mentally and to become have intellectual proudness. So that's why I went to this schooling over there, you see. And this is where I went to fully round out my spiritual thinking. So that's why I went over here. And see, and in each decision, see, you will have some individuals that may look at it and say, why did that person go in there? That wasn't smart. Well, that again could turn out to be just this person's opinion because you just don't know what that person was actually just trying to accomplish in their life at that time. Okay. Now I want to get into, as I told you, when a person applies a principle so well that some persons outside looking in may think, no, that person just totally is ignorant or stupid about the situation. And really the principle that was being applied is, as long as it depends upon you, you just keep your peace. And I'm going to give you an example. It was a man up in age that once had, a nice rapport with somebody who was younger than him. And he was noticing that this person, in general, always had something nice to say, even about the person's own enemies. And the person noticed that. And remember, this was the older person. And at times, this older person who had wisdom, it still got in his craw because he felt like, because really, some of the persons that he was saying good things about, you see, this older person really knew just how badly these other persons felt and talked about this person who had, you see, just a few nice things to always say about them. And it always was brief, no gossip or something like that intended. But see, this person had already learned that as part of, you see, being a reporter, if you will, of facts, that, even persons that he may notice that was a rift or something going on, he still would at least state the facts of what this person was capable of doing. And that was, part of his training that he had already learned. Okay. Now, with that being said, though, this was happening so much. And even one time in a private conversation, the older man, had brought up, this one person's, name. And so the older person said, not everybody feels the way that you think they feel about you. And the younger person said, yeah, I know that. And yet it shocked the older person maybe because of the person just saying, yeah, I know that, And then he said, then why do you say the things that you say at times? Because he really think that the person was really oblivious or ignorant to the situation of some of these individuals. And so the man said, well, according to the good book, just trying to, be like Jesus to keep the peace. And you know what that older man said? He said, you can be like Jesus, but they won't let you be like Jesus. See? Now, isn't that interesting? And it's interesting, too, that, like I said, the person that it came from, nobody wasn't going to mess with that person. You see what I'm saying? So the whole thing is this. What happened? And see, this is what I want to tell you about where I talk about administrators and leaders. Believe it or not, you see, there are times where even good-hearted leaders and administrators, being human, can really get frustrated as well to see persons that they know are good in that position. You see, know they are good in that role, not be placed in certain roles or run out of those roles because the very people that they were fighting for and standing up for did not stand up for them when they needed them to. You see what I'm saying? And so, with that being said, there were situations that would come about, some persons would come in and start feeling the same way that they, heard or knew that this other older person had felt about the situation. And next thing you know, conflict would start up sometimes. Why? Because these other persons like, no, so-and-so must really don't know how this individual feel or that individual feel. And no matter how often that person may say, oh, yeah, I'm aware, but by applying just these principles. And see, some of those principles may look like the other people that the person was just groveling at the other person's feet. And that's not what the person was doing. The person was just doing what was necessary so that, once again, to keep the peace and to give the other persons in their care at least what they needed. And so it was the outside influences that just kept coming in and agitating matters where there was none, before, stirring up competition and all sorts of things of that nature. You see what I'm saying? That then, finally, you see, like any human, even the person who was trying for years to keep the peace, just got to the point that the person couldn't put up with certain things no more. So now, human beings in their frustration, in their anger, you see what I'm saying, can sometimes start, when they start speaking up, then they may be looking like, they're not humble human beings anymore, when really their spirit is so agitated now, and being imperfect, you see, you just start making more mistakes. But see, the thing about it is this. As I've stated before, the way of the world, once persons learn about situations, and even ones they realize, hey, is just not going to be, anything more, to be gained by me, once again, being in this role or that role or what have you. So a person may move on to another role or what have you at times. Okay. And see, and this is the point that I want to really get across here. So the person moves on. All right. Then people who, of course, won't know the full situation, may start saying, I told you so. I told you, but you was just ignorant or what have you. And see, and I'm here to tell you today, that's why I used the examples earlier about when people go through these different paths to become physically strong, or these different paths to become, intellectually knowledgeable about things, and then even spiritually. See, the whole point is a lot of persons still knew, and the information that they really had, they knew what knew what decision they were making, a well-informed decision on these different avenues or paths that they were taking along their life. And see, and that even includes spiritually. You see what I'm saying? So the whole point is, even if somebody is of a different faith at times, because there are many in the world, many as there is. See, sometimes you will have, even I ran into people that they don't necessarily believe everything that, I even shared with them within the first meeting, but it was still interesting enough where it was like, hey, well, you certainly got enough utensils, utensils of God or what have you, that I can at least listen and learn until, I run into something more. You see what I'm saying? And so the whole point is, it doesn't mean that a person, no matter what faith that they were in, were totally oblivious, in their, in what they were learning at that time. And then they grow, And the whole thing is, like I said, once you really know the way of the world and how it functions and things of that nature, there are certain statements, and you heard me say before, where they'll call this group a derogatory name. I don't even want to say it. You see what I'm saying? But I'll go ahead and say it. They'll call this group a cult, that group a cult, or what have you. And the whole point is, as I've said, and I haven't elaborated on it too much, but if you really know the way things are set up spiritually, you will see really a lot of groups, organizations, and even businesses still running that way. But but see, because it's more, as they would call it, orthodox or acceptable, you see, they'll make it seem like it's not running that way. But once you learn, you'll see and understand what I'm talking about. So here's my point again. As I say, when you learn a good principle, and no matter what group the person may be applying in, you know what I'm going to say next. Long as someone isn't breaking any principle laws and hurting anybody, then you see, it gives them time to grow. And sometimes if a person put up what others would say, boy, why is that person taking this abuse like this or that? Well, you see, still in time for that person, you don't really know what's going through that individual's mind. But I will use this last example as between a husband and a wife, okay? There's been times I've told persons, and I've heard and seen a variety of experiences in this area. All sorts of marriages and difficulties in them and things of that nature. But you know what I always told a person? I tell this to the men as well as the women, and mostly sometimes it probably more to the women than it was to the men, because hey, you know how things are. But the whole point is, I would tell them, no matter what you decide, you are the one that have to live with that decision. You are the one who have to live with that decision. See, sometimes well-meaning persons, and some of them not, as well-meaning, will tell this person to just drop this other individual like hotcakes or what have you. And then they'll even tell the person that, why put up with that person's bad attitude just because, you have children or what have you. Well, if you were to put things on the scale as far as that woman's heart, put it this way. If she was to just drop her bad attitude mate, so to speak, and all of a sudden the kids and herself are suffering way more than than to put up with just maybe his rudeness or what have you, then you see that decision that she would make may well put more pressure and hurt on her heart, you see what I'm saying, than it would in just, once again, ignoring the rudeness, of the matter. As I said before, this is just an example. You see what I'm saying? This is just an example. But it really gives you something to think about, where I said again, you can think in being overly knowing the situation, or I said nosiness or busybody, that sometimes you would be helping an individual who's dealing with a certain matter, difficulty, lack of respect or what have you. But make no mistake about it, until they're resolved in their own heart and mind to deal with the repercussions, if you will, the consequences, which, we know there's always a give and take on a situation, that until they're ready to be settled in their heart to make this move or that move after they done tried everything, it's best to allow the person to do that. You see, it's best to allow them to make their own decision and not be forced one way or the other. Because when they do make the decision, and it is because it's resolved in their heart to do it, they will have a better result. You see what I'm saying? Because already their heart and mind is now moving forward, and it won't be divided because they took somebody else's advice that they really didn't want to take in the first place. Not at that time. They weren't resolved in their heart, and it just caused more problems. So thank you for being with me on this That's the Way of the World title. And I hope this helps again in some way. I know I haven't read or talked about other subjects, but the time that we live in, is becoming more and more applicable in your affirmations each day, you see, to make sure you look in the mirror and really say, I'm doing the best I can. With your help, God, I will be able to enjoy another day of life, you see. And thank you for this day of life. And then, of course, you can say what you want to share. But this was just a thought, your thought of thanking God and also realizing you're doing the best you can. Take care of yourself. Here is James reading 2-paragraph excerpt from a book that was bought and purchased decades ago before many were even born who listened to the Perceptive Readers podcast. In here, it was based off of a reading or on a reading that a Bible writer and also prophet named Ezekiel, the persons read Isaiah chapter 61 verse 2, and they took very seriously what was stated about proclaim the day of vengeance. Because, in the book of Ezekiel, God says many times in his name that the nation shall have to know that I am Jehovah. He also stated that he will make Ezekiel very determined. His head will be harder than diamond to describe such as determination, because the people that God was sending him to talk to were hard-headed and hard-hearted as God described them. But he told Ezekiel, I'm going to make your head even harder than theirs. I'm going to make you more determined than them, because you're also speaking the truth from God. Well, with that being said, you learn about, again, you've heard me state, right and wrong, what pleases God and what makes him unhappy and very even angry, you see, as described in Ezekiel, what makes his anger flare up, which is justifiably so, because, it takes a lot to make God angry. So if a person makes God angry, it was justified. They were doing some pretty bad stuff. Now, with that being said, I just want to read these 2 paragraphs here, and it is from a book called The Nation Shall Have to Know That I Am Jehovah. It is no longer in print from my understanding. Like I said, it was bought and purchased many years ago. And this is just a 2-paragraph excerpt because it shows you the state that even persons who claim to worship God or have the desire to worship and know God, how it's an uphill battle at times even to do that, to form even a group, a religion, if you will, to run things just the way that God would want them to be ran, you see, because God's worship is holy. Would you agree? That means it's separate from the way other organizations and businesses and professions run. Okay. Of course, you got to get the supplies, you see, everything that's needed. But the whole point is there are certain practices that God's congregation, you see, his church, if you will, are just not supposed to engage in. At least not knowingly. And that's why you have books like Ezekiel that bring out such matters. Well, let me read this to you because this was an indictment on the churches. And, there's been many, but on the churches that was falling short. And it was obvious of what God was stating, you see. From even the book of Ezekiel, the things that God was stating that was actually causing his people to be left out in the cold, if I can use that expression, not being able to even get the spiritual help that they needed. Yes, Ezekiel brings that out. So here are the two paragraphs, and this was from page 84. Now notice these words, and you can just think about them. Remember I told you this came from the writers of this book, and after prayer for thought, they made a indictment of a letter saying, "We present and charge that Satan formed a conspiracy for the purpose of keeping the people in ignorance of God's provision for blessing them with life, liberty, and happiness, and that others, to wit, unfaithful preachers, conscienceless profiteers, and unscrupulous politicians have entered and said conspiracy, either willingly or unwillingly. That unfaithful preachers have formed themselves into ecclesiastical systems consisting of councils, synods, presbyteries, if I'm saying it correct, associations, etc., and have designated themselves therein as popes, cardinals, bishops, doctors of divinity, pastors, shepherds, reverends, etc., and elected themselves to such offices, which aggregation is herein designated as the clergy. That these have willingly made commercial giants and professional politicians the principal of their flocks." That ends that quote. And this is from "The nations shall know that I am Jehovah." Now, these are very strong words, wouldn't you say? And if this happens to be the case in some churches, you see, then do you think there are difficulties that you have seen or experienced today because of this situation? Well, the book of Ezekiel, the Holy Bible, actually again goes into how God takes note of your sighing and crying over the conditions, you see. I'm going to end this quote or this topic right now, and I will save it and probably place it in a Perceptive Readers podcast, you see, sometime in the future. Have a good day. You have just listened to the Perceptive Readers podcast. Remember, until next time, if you read something that encourages you to improve or enhance your life for the better, it becomes your reality. Developed, created, and owned by James PoeArtistry Productions.